Cool. So let's dive in. So multi-channel ABM, what is it? This is an example of sort of what a multi-channel campaign looks like in a B2C world. So this is something that we've all experienced in our lives, or maybe you've heard a story from a family member or a spouse or a friend that doesn't work in marketing to say, hey, I was, researching a computer. I wanted to buy a new computer. And then for like 2 weeks, I was getting ads for the computer company. And like when I was on Instagram, there were ads. I got an email from them. When I was, going to Forbes, I got sort of a banner ad for the computer company. Like, what is that? How do they do that? And that's this multi-channel attitude that we're talking about here, that we're all super used to experiencing from a B2C perspective, that we now want to translate sort of to the B2B world. So why multi-channel? We all understand sort of what it is and how it works with B2C, but why does it work for an ABM approach? And it's because it works. It's super simple. And I'm not asking you to take my word for it. Got some statistics here to look at. So from a market perspective, we experience the buying cycle very similar to how individuals experience the buying cycle from a B2C side too, right? Like your buyers in the B2B world are using multiple devices online. They want to engage on multiple channels because that's how they're used to buying in their like outside of work hours for their own things. And then just statistically, so this is something, super interesting. In a report, there was a 37% increase in response rates on a multi-channel campaign compared to just a single channel campaign. So going to the terminus side of things, this is something that we've seen that's really like sort of validated the results that our customers have seen. This first statistic I know is kind of like wild, 686% account increase engagement. And it passes the sniff test when I kind of describe the experience that the people see. So the point of display advertising with ABM is to drive more traffic to your website, higher traffic to your website. So you're already, more prone to seeing like higher conversion rates, things like that. But when they just come to your website, either through a direct ad click or sort of indirect or, organic search traffic, they kind of just are living on your website. Where are they going to go? What are they going to do? And that's where chat comes into play, because chat can recommend new content. It can connect them with their dedicated sales rep. If someone is living within your target account audience, it's really easy to be super proactive with the messaging and really targeted with the messaging to sort of get those people into the funnel. So I know it's an insane stat, but it's really verified by what we've seen with our customers. And then with ads and web personalization, which, another channel that we'll talk about here, decrease in bounce rates. So similar story where you're driving better, more qualified traffic to your website, and then web personalization, which allows you to recommend targeted content, maybe change your on-site messaging to the list of people that are coming to your website, is going to keep them around longer, right? It kind of makes sense. And then finally, with ads and email, our customers have seen a 6x increase in their ad click-through rate. So advertising a lot of times lives like at the tippy top of the funnel, right? Like we're using it for awareness. But as folks are moving through the buying cycle and you're starting to engage with them via email, using a similar message in your advertising or just already having that one-to-one relationship via email, we've seen folks have much higher click-through rates on their ads because they're already engaging with you. So set the stage on why multi-channel makes sense, some of the benefits that our customers have seen, what folks in the market have seen. Amazing, like let's go and do it. Well, it's, we all know that it's not that easy, which is why you're here today. So just to talk briefly through some of the roadblocks that we've seen customers have in implementing more of a multi-channel ABM strategy. Limited bandwidth or resources, right? So this is, if you're working with a small team or, you have a smaller budget for marketing, it can be tough to manage multiple channels, to understand ad spend across display advertising or LinkedIn or using direct mail, things like that. Like it can be difficult to prove the ROI of what all of these individual channels are doing, which is why rolling up to sort of an ABM strategy, a program strategy to say that all of these things influence the pipeline creation, influence the revenue that we won, makes it a bit of an easier conversation. And kind of on a similar topic, multiple channel owners. So on the opposite side, like if you have a larger organization where, you have a digital lead or maybe, a marketing automation person or someone that runs field events specifically, people that are running different channels individually can create difficulties in data sharing, in communication, in visibility, in the timing of things. And so that's where we've seen a lot of folks kind of struggle when it comes to running multi-channel in that sense. And then keeping messaging consistent. So again, to the point on multiple channel owners using a bunch of different channels, how do you keep that consistency of an experience? Because account-based marketing is all about creating that sort of surround sound message experience for your buyers, and how it can be difficult to do that across multiple channels, as well as to orchestrate all those channels, right? So I talked about when something is happening versus when something else is happening, making sure that you're creating that sort of experience throughout the buying cycle or the full customer life cycle, and understanding which channels are good at different life cycle stages for different reasons. And then data availability and accuracy. So this is something that is super tough. Certainly like a crawl, walk, run approach really helps identify where you are today, what you need to do to improve, and sort of how to scale. But this is basically about, can you trust the data that you have? A lot of marketers don't think they can, especially like CRM level data, stuff that needs to be updated both through sort of like external partners or like your sales reps or CSMs updating contact level data or account level data there, as well as the availability and kind of to double click the access of that data to your full go-to-market team. So where does that data live? Can sales actually use it contextually when they're reaching out, or to help them prioritize who they're reaching out to? Things like that can be really tough to manage when you're using multiple systems. And then finally, the marketing and channel attribution. So this is a huge topic with ABM specifically. I talked a little bit about how these individual channels roll up to more of a program strategy versus just an individual channel strategy, which helps the conversation, because sort of that zone of truth is the pipeline that we created, not the leads and where the leads come from and how qualified for the leads and first touch, last touch, et cetera. But that stuff is still really important for understanding the efficacy of the individual channels and sort of the ROI of those individual channels. So there's two ways to look at it, right? From a programmatic perspective as well as a channel perspective, and that can be kind of hard to parse through. So yes, I set the stage for, hey, here's why multi-channel is a really cool strategy. Here's why you should do it. Here are the results we've seen. And then sort of like poured water on the fire and saying like, this is why it's really hard to do, which hopefully is why you're here today. And sort of we can help talk through some of the advantages of doing it and sort of how to take a crawl, walk, run approach. So what is a crawl, walk, run? Probably from a gut reaction, you understand sort of what we're talking about here. But just to make it sort of a formalized definition, so we're all on the same page, we define crawl, walk, run as a scaled approach to go-to-market program planning and execution that involves continuous testing, measurement, and optimization. And so the key takeaway here is that you need to think holistically about the strategy that you're running and the program plays that you're running to understand how to move from crawl to walk to run. All right, so before we dive into the actual sort of full example that I'll talk through from here's how to figure out how to choose accounts for this, how to work with sales, the sorts of channels that we're going to use, how we're going to measure, and sort of give you like one single example of it. It also makes sense to talk through a couple of these like frameworks and strategies that we use at Terminus, and I use a lot when I'm talking to customers. And the first is the concept of full life cycle engagement. So most of you are probably familiar with the traditional marketing funnel, which if you look in the center of the screen, sort of this is an inverted funnel, but typically we're used to seeing it the other way, where we start at the top, we're generating a ton of awareness, a ton of like volume on our website or on our different content pieces, sort of channels that we're using. And the goal is to sort of convert those down each stage to smaller and smaller levels to hand off to the sales team once it's qualified, for the sales team to close the deal. And then their job is done, right? Then they hand it off to the CS team, and marketing doesn't have a whole lot of hand in that. As a customer marketing person, I always, it boils my blood whenever I'm seeing marketing, we don't really talk to our customers as a marketing team, because that's part of the journey of your customer. So what we do with ABM is we flip the funnel, where instead of starting with a huge sort of volume of leads that you're then qualifying through nurture programs, et cetera, you're starting with a more honed list of accounts that are a good fit for you, both firmographically, technographically, all the things that matter to your business, as well as are actively in market or actively interested in what you have to say. So that's through things like online research intent data, engagement data, which you can find, people that are coming to your website, things like that. So combining that fit data with the sort of behavioral data gives you a really good lens into, these are the accounts that we need to be going after. We're not wasting time. We're not wasting money or resources or our sales team's time sort of nurturing and qualifying leads that may turn into nothing. We've all seen the statistic that 1% of leads turn into revenue, which is a pretty low number. That's 99% of the contacts that we're generating, that we're qualifying, are actually signing on the dotted line. That is a ton of wasted time and money and resources. So ABM helps us sort of filter that 99% out from the jump and really focus in on the 1%. And the reason it's a flipped funnel and not just a straight line down is because the farther through the buying cycle, through the life cycle that an account or a prospect gets, the more engagement we want to drive through them. And that's something that multi-channel can certainly help with, getting more ingrained, having more channels that the person can interact with, giving them more power of their own buying cycle, things like that. So how do we actually go through and execute this? So the team framework that I mentioned, just to sort of run through this quickly before we jump into the program, this is sort of intended as here's how you do, right? So thinking through the full life cycle, that flipped funnel, that's like the strategy part of this. That's the planning part of this. The team framework is, okay, we know that we need to generate new pipeline, right? That's our business objective that we're trying to drive. How are we literally going to go and do that? And the team framework is going to help us sort of do that. So just to walk through, T is for target. So this is leveraging data to help align on key segments and prioritize your account engagement investments. So this is all about sort of what I talked about with that fit data, that intent and engagement level data, using things that are already at your disposal, like geolocation, or firmographics like revenue, employee count, things like that, to sort of get you started, which we'll talk in more detail as we walk through the program example. And then engagement, this is where, the multi-channel strategy in particular comes into play, because these are the channels that you're using. This is how you're getting your message in front of your buyers, sort of the experience that you're creating for them, and that like surround sound experience that I mentioned earlier. And then from an activation standpoint, this is, identifying, streamlining how your sales organization, as well as your customer success organization, consumes and applies the signals that you're providing with things like engagement data. So you're starting with a list of, here's who we're going to go after. The engage part is, here's how we're going to go after them from a marketing perspective. And then the activate is, sales team, here's how to go reach out to these people. Here's when you should reach out to them when they show these signals. Here's how you should reach out to them with the channels that we're using. Here's the message to tell through the signals that we're seeing, the content that we're running, things like that. And then finally, measure, M. This is really critical. This is something that I think, as marketers, we always struggle with. It's not specific to ABM, but particularly with ABM, because we're creating such a multi-channel experience for people. We're really focused in on more tailored experiences, different types of content for different types of audiences, different types of plays for different types of audiences. Breaking through that noise and understanding the metrics that to look at can be a big challenge. And so thinking through the team framework in this way will really help you identify those things up front, so that you're not midway through running a play and then you're saying like, oh, I wish we would have thought of X or Y or Z. I wish we would have done this. I wish we would have thought to set a baseline for this thing so that we can compare it against. By using the team framework, it'll help you sort of get all those cobwebs out in the planning stage. All right. And so finally, before jumping in, sort of from planning your multi-channel approach, your program approach for these, really starting with the data. How are we able to target today? What's the data that we're using today? And then what I mentioned earlier on, what's the availability and the ease of access to the data that we have today for our sales team, for our customer success team, for our marketing team? So these, this is a good question to ask amongst your go-to-market team. And this level is a really good place to bring in marketing ops, sales ops, rev ops, however your team is structured, the people that sort of own your CRM, own your marketing automation platform. If you're using an ABM platform, sort of the admin or owner of that ABM platform, to really sort of like bang their heads together and say, are there gaps today? That's how you sort of identify where you are from a crawl, walk, run perspective, and don't just approach it by saying, oh, well, we've piloted ABM, or maybe we've been running ABM for like a year. We've seen some results. We don't really know where to go. We're at a crawl, right? Like if I ask a customer where they would assess themselves on a crawl, walk, run, framework, they're like, oh, we're a crawl. We're moving towards a walk. Like unilaterally, that's what I'll hear, even from our most advanced customers, because people always look at what they're doing and see the end goal of what they want this idealized version of ABM to look like, rather than sort of the success that they've had in the short term, what they've been doing thus far. So good questions to ask on this slide when it comes to like identifying where you are in that scaling version of crawl, walk, run, that sort of abstract framework of crawl, walk, run. That way you can identify, here's areas where we need to really focus in on when we're running our next play, right? So from the engage side, great question to ask, what channels are we using today at each funnel stage? Maybe you're not running plays at each bespoke funnel stage. Maybe you're just focusing in on sort of like that opportunity creation part. You're taking sort of warmed accounts and trying to convert them into opportunities. And that's like 100% of what your marketing team is focused on today. That's totally fine. You don't have to take that full life cycle approach from the jump, but you should identify, what are we doing today? As well as, is this working today? Which we'll get to here in a minute. And then from an activation perspective, how well are we working with our sales and customer success teams? And I specifically go back to like, what's our cadence of information sharing? Are we meeting bi-weekly? Are we just meeting quarterly with the sales leaders? Like, do we have a Slack channel devoted to go to market or to open pipeline, things like that? Like, what's that cadence of information sharing? Because building that transparency and that visibility also creates accountability. And that's something that is, completely critical to running successful ABM. And then finally, on the measurement side, what metrics are we already tracking? What metrics are we able to track that we're not looking at today? And then what are the metrics that we want to be tracking or that we need to be tracking that we either aren't or we don't currently have the capability to? So as you're thinking about a multi-channel approach, you probably can get easy access to current pipeline, right? You probably can get easy access to retention rates if you're focused on the customer side, but you maybe can't get as easy of access to a variety of other metrics like your deal velocity. Maybe that's not something you're looking at today, but that closing deals is of paramount importance to your business. You need to understand, what does that sales cycle look like today? What's that baseline? If we're going to be running plays to attack sort of our closed won rates, you need to understand where the gaps are today. If you're tracking 5 opportunity stages, what are your conversion rates between those opportunity stages? What's your average days in stage for those different stages? These are sort of that like second level, call it a walk or a run if you want, second level metrics to hone in on that'll really help you, one, like provide value to your sales team and build trust with your sales team to say like, running this play, focusing on this type of strategy, it takes a long time for this stuff to impact dollars. You're not going to start ABM, regardless of the life cycle stage that you're focused on. You're not going to start ABM in a month, see these huge returns, right? You need to be thinking about how you're scaling and iterating over time. What are your initial metrics to look at? And a lot of that can start with those baselines, depending on what funnel stage you're focused on. Okay, enough of the preamble. Let's jump into sort of an example crawl, walk, run, crawl program, I should say. And we'll also talk a little bit about how we can iterate this over time. So this is taken from our ABM program planner. So, visit terminus.com and you can get this as a resource. It also comes with blank templates for you to fill out. This is something like, I use a lot when I'm planning programs, just because it does a great job of making sure nothing gets missed. And at a minimum helps you sort of understand what are the types of questions you should be asking, what are the sorts of data points you need for any of the programs that you run. So from a top level down, what's the overarching goal of this program? So in this specific example, we're focused in on driving demand for a product within a specific market. So imagine that we have a sales team that's broken up by territories, and this is a specific territory that we're focused on today. You also see on the left, like we have an owner for the program budget, how long it's going to last, sort of the different platforms that we're using, especially for things like the different engagement channels that we're going to be using. And then a description of what the program is, like what the purpose of it is, as well as the actual outcome. So this is that top level business metric that we're trying to drive, regardless of the channels that we're using, regardless of how we're working with sales, even regardless of like how we're going to specifically pick the accounts in the program. What we're doing is we're generating new business opportunities for the Northeast region. That's the thing we started with, and we're going to build the program from that business objective. And then finally, something I definitely want to call out is that key internal stakeholders. This is really critical. One, just to drive better visibility, especially amongst leadership, but also that accountability. Like if you identify and present this to your leadership team and you're saying, hey, the head of Northeast sales, like you're one of my key stakeholders. I also, I need communication back from you, whatever our meeting cadence is going to be, things like that, that will, as we get to the activate slide specific to this program, we'll talk about. And then moving sort of like down one level from that business objective, high level overview of what the program is, what is the actual sort of meat of the program that we're going to be running here. So control groups is something to call out. I talked a little bit about data and data availability, as well as like establishing baselines, things like that. Control groups from I'm just getting started with ABM perspective are a great way to do this. So for us in this program, we're targeting that Northeast group with sort of an account-based strategy. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare our results, like that pipeline, that revenue, against the other regions that aren't getting this account-based outreach, right? So we're not going to stop all of our sales motions in the other regions, but they're not getting this more targeted messaging, this more sort of surround sound experience, to see both against our existing baselines in the Northeast. Are we driving more revenue? Are we creating more pipeline? But also, as we run this program, is it driving more results in comparison to the other regions? Because as we think about moving this to a walk or a run, we want to run this program in our other regions. So we need to be able to compare and contrast sort of results from that perspective. All right, and then so accounts that are not in scope. This is specific to, understanding the good fit people. Are there accounts that sort of sales may be working already today that aren't like a good fit for this specific program? And we'll kind of cut them out from the account-based outreach. All right, and then diving into the target side, right? So this is all the data, this is the segmentation, this is about identifying who we're going to be going after. This is a really good sort of overview. If you look on the left, it's different data sources that we can be using. So for us, we're using the Determinants Account Hub, which is sort of where a lot of our firmographics live. And then we're also going to be using relationship data, depending, specific to that location, to understand sort of that contextual prioritization of the outreach. Anything else to call out here? So I think, maybe another thing is, as we think about the actual data points that we want to focus in on, a good place to start when you're thinking about target from a crawl perspective is sort of like what we call like natural segments, which for folks that aren't aware of that term, it's really just like, what are the things that you already have easy access to today that your sales team is already using to reach out to accounts, or your RevOps team is already using to sort of identify your ICP or your ideal customer profile. I guess just to double click on it on the ICP, if you're not aware, ideal customer profile, think of it like a buyer persona, but at an account level. So this is about understanding, like we know based on our current deals that are closing, the best of our best customers, sort of research and financial analytics done by our RevOps team, that companies within this revenue range, or like this minimum revenue range, or companies in these particular regions, or companies that use these specific technologies already, are going to have more success for us. Their close rates are higher, their ACV is higher, they renew at a higher rate, things like that, to understand these are the best of the best, right? So you start with your total addressable market. That's anyone that can use your product. But as you think about sort of an ICP, that's taking out anyone that isn't like a best fit for you today. So different attributes to use as you're sort of narrowing that ICP, you can use things like revenue range. So like today in this example, sort of the attributes that we're going to use, it's specific industries. In tech and manufacturing, they have over 500 employees and a revenue range over $1 million. Obviously, they're in that Northeast region that we already discussed. And then a fit score. So this is something, you can work with specifically determinists, or you can develop your own sort of metric for this. But this sort of breaks down the engagement data, relationship data, all that those sorts of things to identify like, hey, are they a good fit for us today? Sort of data sources, this is where the data is coming from. We're going to be refreshing this on a quarterly basis, things like that. And again, another thing that's really critical to this, who's responsible for updating this, right? Like, well, who's accountable for this part of the program? It's our marketing ops person. And then as we move to engage, this is the meat of this multi-channel strategy, right? Like, what are the channels we're going to use to drive business in this region? It's important to note here that, like, going back, we started at that business objective level, right? We're trying to drive pipeline in the Northeast region. We didn't start and say, I really want to run a multi-channel program. Like, that's not how we should be doing things, right? Like, we're starting by saying, this is the business objective we're looking to drive. Here's the program we're going to run to drive the business objective. And then we're going to have a better understanding of the channels we should use that are a good fit, both for the people that we're targeting, as well as the program that we're running. So again, we're at a crawl stage here. You'll see on the left, these are, a lot of terminus specific channels that we run, but you can add things like direct mail, et cetera. But because this is a crawl program, we're going to keep it simple. We're running, 3 channels, which is, we don't want to be running a single channel, right? Like, we don't want to just run an email cadence or just run display advertising. You want to still create that surround sound experience across multiple channels to help drive that and create that experience. And then as you get ROI, maybe you can expand budget or sophistication to add additional channels. But for this example, we're using display advertising, which is sort of a pillar of all account-based programs, in my opinion. LinkedIn advertising, which sits really closely alongside display advertising. Can be more targeted on LinkedIn from like a contact level, which is great, sort of to mirror that display advertising message, or to sort of hone in more specifically on the types of roles that you're looking to attract as part of the program. And then email experiences, right? So this is when our reps are reaching out to these people to help convert them. Both the email messaging is super important, as well as, we do through Terminus sort of email banner ads in the email signature for someone's email, like the one-to-one email that they're running, that can sort of mirror again that display advertising message. I talked way earlier on about how email and advertising go really well together in driving more engagement. Sort of that email banner marketing ad does something very similar, where we see astronomically high click-through rates on those email banners compared to display advertising, because it's one-to-one, the contact is reading it, they're looking at the email signature, and they might click on that, whereas they wouldn't click on an ad that's on a random website like ESPN or Forbes. Okay, so those are the channels that we're specifically using, but just to sort of walk through the ideology or the strategy behind those channels, the message is super important. Obviously, we want to create a holistic, consistent message across all of the channels that we're using. So the messaging is really important there. Again, we're calling out the team members that are going to be sort of the stakeholders for the messaging, as well as the engagement channels that we're using. And you notice here, like, we have an ADR manager on here. Getting that sales buy-in is super important, since we're going to be running this and sharing a lot of this data with sales. And then who's responsible for the orchestration? So specific things that we're doing, we're running an event, so our field marketing person runs the event. Our ad campaigns across display and LinkedIn, we're having our digital marketing person that's going to be running that, and working really closely in concert with our ADR manager. And then talk a little bit here about Terminus campaign analytics. It's something super product heavy, but this sort of like teases a little bit once we get to the measure section of how we're going to be looking holistically at the metrics that we're looking for. And from an activation perspective, how are we specifically working with sales and the different sales teams that are going to be engaged here? On the left, again, this is sort of like our data box, our channel data box. These are, specific to Terminus things, but just to describe quickly, we talked a little bit about engagement level data. So engagement spike, meaning hey, this person came to the website a bunch of times or clicked on a bunch of pieces of content, and Terminus sort of identifies and says like, this person's hot, like this person's on our website a bunch, they're reading us a bunch of stuff, sales rep who's managing this account, now's the time, like now is when you should be reaching out. As well as things like sales insights can provide a lot more of that contextual level data, like what are the pages on the website they were visiting, what is the content that they were downloading, so that when they're reaching out, it's not sort of a, hey, noticed you are interested in our product. It can be more tailored to, hey, I saw that you're researching this type of topic. Can I also recommend this piece of content, or would love to get together on a call to talk about sort of what you're looking for, things like that, to help contextualize on that outreach, that one-to-one outreach. And then there's a lot of information on this slide, because again, like this is something that's shared with your stakeholders across teams, would potentially be shared with your individual sales reps, sort of to break down the expectations, the process, the like how to, and the, you know, what they're going to get from marketing, what marketing is going to get from them. So desired sales action is really important. We talk about this in Terminus terms of like reason to call is something we use a lot here. Like why are you reaching out specific to this thing? Like what's the individual messaging point for this specific thing? And then again, stakeholders, accountability, visibility, who's going to sort of own this activation piece, which again, marketing ops, rev ops, sales ops, whatever your team looks like, as well as leaders on the sales team, are going to be super important to sort of driving activity from the sales team, as well as like a good feedback loop, right? Sales reps, like they have a ton on their plates. It's really important to sort of create that easy funnel of information back to the marketing team. Finally, on measure. Okay, so again, I mentioned earlier, like this can be such a tough nut to crack. Won't go into super big detail on the left side, because again, these are really like specific Terminus reports, but it's good to identify the types of things that you want to look at. Brenna, I know, ran through a session, my teammate Brenna ran through a session right before this one on measurement best practices, and sort of talking through sort of a crawl, walk, run approach to that, as well as running through a business objective, program objective, channel objective. And that's a good way to think through measurement. So we go all the way back to sort of this high level program overview where we're generating new business. That's our program, or our business objective. And we're running a program to reach that. So then we have KPI specific to the program that we're running, which is like, you know, you'll see in the middle there, number of opportunities and pipeline created, things like that, as well as specific channel metrics, like, you know, event attendees that our field marketing person is running, our ad click-through rate, you know, if we're running chat play, like our chat conversion rate or total number of chat conversations that happened. And those things, this is something I see a lot of marketers, a lot of ABMers fall into the trap of, you know, something like an ad click-through rate is not a good measure of the success of your program. It is a measure of the success of the messaging or the design or the placement of the ad, right? So that's why when we look at the program side, we want to be looking at things like opportunities created, pipeline created. I mentioned deal velocity, things like that, that all of those channels that we're using, all of them are trying to drive those program objectives. And then we look at the individual channel channel KPIs to understand things like attribution, ROI of direct mail, ROI of our ad spend. Did we get enough impressions? Did we get in front of, you know, 80% of the accounts we wanted to with advertising? Those things are really specific to understanding the efficacy of your ads, not of your holistic program. Huge soapbox. I won't get on the soapbox anymore about that. All right, so we're going to have a few minutes for questions here, but you know, I mentioned at the top, final takeaways. This is the sort of meat. If you're going to just go and do 4 things, these should be the 4 things. Self-assessment. You know, we talked a lot about baselines. We talked a lot about sales relationships, team framework, things like that. This is super critical to getting started and understanding where you are on that nebulous crawl, walk, run scale, and not just saying like, we're starting from scratch across the board, because you likely aren't. Maybe you are, but you likely aren't. Like maybe you already have a really good working relationship with your sales leaders. Like that's a really great area for you to start and sort of expand on from that perspective. But that self-assessment is really important. Start small, but know where you want to iterate. This is specific to the crawl, walk, run that we're talking about here. Like you may be at a crawl across the board with, different levels of success, different things that you want to focus on, but understanding what your end goal is or what your next step is, where you're trying to go, is really important, so that you're not then just looking back and being like, well, the program was success. Like, we drove pipeline. So what about next time? Like, are we just going to do the same thing? Do we need to adjust in any way? Like, you need to be thinking ahead on where you might want to iterate, so that you can measure that and understand that while the program is running and not just after. Objectives first, channels second. So again, just to hammer this home, business objective, program objective, channels. We should not start by saying, I want to run a multi-channel strategy. We should start by saying, I want to drive X for my business. And a multi-channel strategy is going to help me solve that objective, right? Because you can run 80 channels at once and drive no pipeline if it's not orchestrated correctly, if it's not a consistent experience, if you're not measuring things, if things aren't tied together in the right way, if you don't have good visibility and communication between your teams. Multi-channel won't get you anywhere without that strategy to start. And finally, plug to use our campaign planner. So the thing we walked through here, it's got a great template in there. I share this with every customer that I talk to if they aren't using it already. It's also easy to take and adapt in your own way, slides, things like that, to sort of hone in on extra information that maybe you need or things that maybe aren't as relevant to your business. But even if you aren't going to use the one that we have, develop your own. Use this as a framework. It's really about having a single deliverable that you can take to every go-to-market meeting, every sales leadership meeting, every marketing meeting, every metrics meeting. That's your sort of source of truth. That's your Bible for the program, for the strategy that you're trying to run. All right. And now we have time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the chat here. Great. Cool. Let me look and see what chat we got. We got 6 minutes left. Yes, I apologize for the speaker notes. That was a huge brain fart for me. I wish I could blame it on it being Monday, but it's not Monday. Cool. I don't see any questions here. Would love, if we've got, so this is so huge props to Mojo Media and Mason and folks that are running the event today. Hopefully you've all got a ton of great info from the sessions. I know I have been lurking a lot so far this morning. It's been a much, chill atmosphere, really great content. Really appreciate everybody that's joining in and hopefully got something out of this. I don't want to shut us down with 5 minutes to spare in case there are any questions, but yeah, if anyone has any, feel free to drop them in. I guess the last plug that I will give, go to Terminus.com. We have an ABM 101 content section. Get our ABM program planner. Even if you're not running ABM today, that is a great thing to bring to your marketing leaders, your sales leaders, to start the conversation. And you can kind of walk through and be like, do we have visibility into this today? Like, are we thinking about this today? Things like that. It can be a really good conversation starter, which for a lot of us is the priority, just to get started. Well, cool. All right. I think we'll shut it down. I really appreciate everybody's time and attention. Hopefully you got something out of this and have some action items. And hopefully you're not still asleep and the final takeaways sort of woke you up. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. Great rest of the ABM-A-THON. I'm really excited for the rest of the content. Bye, everybody.